The minute Brody slapped his sneakered foot on the boardroom table and said, "What we need is disruptive momentum," I knew we were officially circling the corporate drain. I had just spent 4 hours untangling a critical vendor issue that would have delayed our delivery schedule by 8 weeks, quietly saving the quarter without needing a standing ovation or a pat on the back. Meanwhile, the chief executive officer's son, fresh off whatever expensive wellness retreat, birthed this cursed new title of chief innovation officer, was suggesting we gamify compliance. I wish I were kidding. Gamify compliance. This was a Tuesday morning. By Thursday afternoon, he was asking if we could monetize downtime by incentivizing task ambiguity. That one actually made someone snort in the back of the conference room. I did not laugh. I had seen this movie before, and I knew exactly how it ended. Some over-lacquered failson tries to duct tape buzzwords onto operational pipelines he does not understand, and when the wheels fall off, they blame the person who told them they were loose in the first place. I should probably mention that I am Timothy Ward, 55, Director of Strategic Operations. I have been with this company for 11 years. I do not speak unless it is absolutely necessary. I do not panic unless the server rooms are on fire, and I do not indulge ego unless it is written in the contract. I have survived 3 chief executive officers and 2 major mergers. There was even the time our former chief technology officer tried to move our entire cloud infrastructure onto his personal home storage drive for cost-saving reasons. What I do is keep things running smoothly, legally, and with as few lawsuits as humanly possible. By contrast, Brody thinks workflow hygiene means wiping his phone screen with his sleeve. He came back from Aspen with a whiteboard, an executive title, and a weekly synchronization session he tried to schedule on Fridays at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. He is the kind of guy who calls Outlook a legacy platform, and once tried to submit an urgent document by taking a photo of it on his phone and inserting it into a shared spreadsheet. I am not even angry about it. I am just exhausted. If you are still listening and enjoy stories where corporate karma gets served on a chilled silver platter with a side of humiliation, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. Most people forget, and it truly makes our team happy. Back to Brody in the slow-motion wreck he was piloting. The first time he interrupted one of my operational reviews, he did not even introduce himself. He just barged into the room, clicked present on the conference room monitor, and started showing a pitch deck full of stock photos of mountain climbers and one terrifying slide that said Beast Mode Operations in an absurd font. I just stared at him. When he was finished, I asked if there was a business request embedded in any of that. He blinked and said he was ID-ing. I told him to try doing it silently next time. To his credit, he did not retaliate right away. He just logged off, then immediately sent a feedback form to my direct reports, asking how adaptable I was to new paradigms. The truth was, I had been shielding him more than fighting him, cleaning up behind the scenes, reformatting his meeting notes before they hit the investors, and reassigning employees he mismanaged before they could escalate to human resources. I did not do it for him. I did it for the company, because at the end of the day, someone had to keep the lights on. But it was not just Brody. The whole leadership culture was rotting from the top down. The chief executive officer, Grant Vance, who also happened to be Brody's father, had checked out. He was too busy grooming his legacy, both literally and metaphorically. Grant kept saying that Brody's ideas were fresh and that we needed to modernize the hierarchy. But modernization without foundation is just a slideshow waiting to collapse. We had contracts teetering on technicalities, vendors operating without updated statements of work, and an investor milestone coming up that required 6 layers of regulatory oversight, all of which lived invisibly on my desk. It was not ego, it was infrastructure. I did not talk about what I managed because the point was for no one to notice when it worked. It was invisible efficiency, and that is what scared Brody the most. You cannot dominate what you do not understand. You cannot replace what you do not know exists. So he started poking, questioning my meetings, reassigning small tasks, and scheduling alignment reviews with my analysts. Once he walked by my desk and muttered that deadwood does not prune itself. I grew up around lumberyards. Deadwood is not what clogs the system. It is the fungus that thinks it is the tree. By the time we hit the first week of the quarter, I could smell the smoke curling under the door. He wanted a confrontation, but I do not yell. I do not slam doors. I do not bark on chat threads at midnight like he does. I wait, I log, I prepare. And when Brody decided to go full Icarus over a client presentation, I did not even flinch. Because when someone thinks they are untouchable, they forget to check if the wires they are cutting are live. It happened during the third quarter alignment call with our aerospace client, Aerodyne Solutions. This was the client with the $50 million milestone tied to deliverables, where every single word had to be calibrated like we were diffusing an explosive device. We were mid-sentence, literally mid-sentence, when my cell phone buzzed 3 times in a row. It was the same number, with no voicemail and no context. It was Brody trying to break through, like a toddler pounding on a locked bathroom door. I muted myself, stepped away from the microphone, and answered because I assumed someone had died, or the server had caught fire, or he had tried to upload a regulatory compliance document to a public social media platform again. Brody snapped immediately, with no greeting or preamble. He demanded to know why I was not in his brainstorm session. I asked which brainstorm session he was referencing. He claimed it was the branding alignment session he had scheduled 5 minutes prior, saying he needed me in the room immediately. I told him I was on a call with Aerodyne Solutions and that he had approved the agenda himself. Brody spat back that his session was more important because they were reimagining the visual tone of the roadmap. I asked him if he had checked with the compliance team before setting up a meeting that directly conflicted with a major client delivery review. He scoffed, claiming that the compliance team was just a bunch of slow bureaucrats who did not understand the velocity of innovation. He kept talking about how we needed to change our operational mindset and embrace speed. I reminded him that speed without compliance is just a fast track to a federal audit, but he was not listening. I paused, giving him a full beat of silence, and asked if he wanted me to leave a milestone compliance review to discuss design fonts. He shouted that they were not fonts but emotive vectors. He said that with his whole chest, as if his words alone could alter the laws of corporate finance. I did not yell or argue. I simply told him I would follow up after my current call. That was when he snapped completely. He screamed that he was the chief executive officer's son and that when he calls, I answer. Then he told me I was fired. He asked if I heard him, repeating that I was fired. For a moment, I just stood there, the receiver hot in my hand, listening to my heartbeat thud against the silence on the other end, fired just like that. As if I were a coffee machine he could unplug. As if 11 years of infrastructure, continuity, and trust could be dismissed by a tantrum in designer sneakers. I did not respond. I did not indulge him. I hung up without a word, walked back to my desk unmuted, and rejoined the Aerodyne Solutions call as if nothing had happened. I closed out the final scope discussion and smiled politely as the client remarked that my team always made it easy to sign off. After the call ended, I sat there for a few seconds, long enough to hear the air conditioner kick on and the distant clack of some junior project manager trying to print a massive document on the wrong paper tray. Then I opened my inbox and searched for the funding agreement clause 7.3 regarding oversight disbursement. There it was. The email I had flagged months ago, containing the line I knew by heart. It stated that all capital disbursements were contingent upon active oversight by the registered operational officer. Any change to the designated party had to be filed and accepted in writing by the board and all lead investors prior to disbursement. I hit forward, sent it to my personal account with the subject line "for your information," and wrote "just in case" in the body. Then I stood up. I did not slam drawers or stage a dramatic exit. I did not even clear my browser history because I had nothing to hide, and they had everything to lose. I grabbed my coat, the half-empty thermos I always meant to wash, and a small office plant I had managed to keep alive longer than 3 chief executive officers. I walked past the front desk, nodded to the security guard, and held the elevator door for someone from Human Resources, who did not even look up from her phone. The strangest part was that no one stopped me. There was not a peep from legal, not a message from Human Resources, and not even a follow-up from Brody. I might as well have been a ghost already. By the time I reached the parking lot, the sun was just starting to dip, casting long shadows over the cracked pavement like a giant rake dragging across the sky. I sat in my car for a while with the engine off and my phone face down, letting the silence do its work. There is a peculiar peace in being underestimated, because while they are celebrating your absence, they do not realize the clock has already started ticking, and the fuse was already lit. I knew that they would not check the agreements, and that they would assume everything would just work itself out. It was a beautiful evening, and for the first time in 11 years, I did not have to worry about tomorrow's operational meetings. I started my car and drove home slowly, enjoying the traffic and the warm breeze. 4 days. That was how long it took me to realize I was officially fired. Unofficially, there was no email from Human Resources, no exit paperwork, and no health insurance package showing up in my inbox like a greasy hangover. There was nothing but silence, a cowardly corporate silence. It was as if they were hoping I would just vanish into the retirement fog with a thank you card and a sheet cake they forgot to order. But I am not built for passive fades. I do not disappear. I observed the morning after Brody's tantrum. I made coffee in my kitchen just as I did every weekday, still waking up at 5:30 in the morning out of pure muscle memory. I did not cry or rage. I just sat at my counter with my planner, open to a calendar that no longer applied to me, staring at a list of meetings I would not be attending. Then I opened my laptop. My first stop was the investment dashboard. The company had granted me a fairly aggressive equity package after our last acquisition, negotiated while the chief executive officer was too busy playing golf with the board. Brody was not even in the picture then, probably still doing keg stands in a frat house that smelled like cheap body spray and wet despair. I logged in expecting an alert, a revocation notice, or a pending action banner across the top of the portal, but everything was untouched. My vested options were still active, with no flags and no termination update. The system still thought I was employed, which was highly interesting. Next, I checked my work inbox from my phone out of curiosity, not desperation. It was still active, and there was still no message from Human Resources. My calendar had not even been cleared, and I was still listed as the meeting host for Friday's operational forecast review. I laughed a real, short, bitter, and honest laugh. Brody did not just fire me, he ghosted me. He wanted the drama of power without the follow-through. He wanted to brag about firing me without doing the actual paperwork that proved it. That is not leadership. That is cosplay. From what I could tell through professional network posts and whispers. From a few brave souls still on the inside, Brody was already strutting through the office like a peacock. He was bragging to the marketing team about removing friction points, which apparently meant letting go of 3 directors and replacing them with agile-focused shadow pods. I did not ask for details, but I think he got the idea from an online thread. I did not reach out to anyone, nor did I try to claw my way back. I just watched. I monitored the chat channels that remained open to me. I watched the general chat channel turn into a chaotic mess of confused project managers. One manager asked who had authorized the removal of the approval gates for vendor payments. Brody's college friend, whom he had placed in charge of procurement, replied that they were adopting a trust-based system to speed up operations. The accountant immediately chimed in to ask how they were going to reconcile this trust-based system with our banking requirements, only to be met with an automated response that Brody had set up. It was comedy gold, but it was also a tragic display of corporate incompetence. They had bypassed every control I had put in place over the last decade, and they did not even realize why those checks and balances existed in the first place. Meanwhile, vendor invoices were getting kicked back because the new guy, one of Brody's friends from college, did not know how to approve statements of work above a certain monetary threshold. Finance was bottlenecked. Procurement started emailing to check in more often than usual, which anyone in operations knows is code for an impending disaster. And then came the real problem. An email from our lead investor asking for clarification on milestone documentation. Apparently, no one had realized that I was the only person cleared to verify certain compliance thresholds. It had to be me, not because I was special, but because my name was literally written into the legal agreements. My name, Timothy Ward, was specified, not just my title. I watched Brody host a live broadcast about flattening verticals and leveraging digital maturity. He even claimed we were stronger than ever while standing in front of a whiteboard that had my name written next to the words Legacy Bottleneck in red marker. Strong enough to forget the single person who holds the key to your funding compliance? That was bold. People started texting me, mostly the quiet ones. The compliance lead asked if I remembered where the fourth quarter documentation log lived. The assistant to the chief financial officer asked if we ever refiled the oversight designation clause after the merger. One particularly brave analyst sent a picture of a dumpster fire floating down a flooded street with a caption about the daily vibe. I did not answer most of them. I just archived the messages and let them stack up like dominoes on a slick floor. They always assume power is in the room. They never imagine it might have walked out without slamming the door. They thought they fired me, but I was just getting started. It started with the weekly operations summary, going out to the wrong distribution list. It was not a huge deal on paper except it included his second quarter projections that had not been board approved, client names under non-disclosure agreements, and one unfortunate typo that listed our total backlog as $22 instead of $22 million. Brody thought it was funny, claiming it gave us scrappy charm. Legal did not agree, and neither did the investor relations team, who had to field 3 frantic calls from our European investors asking if the company had suffered a catastrophic collapse overnight. By the following Monday, the cracks had formed visible fault lines. Deliverables were late, and internal escalation tickets started piling up. Our client portal, which I had meticulously integrated with a self-healing error handler, was now spitting out access denials for top-tier customers. Brody's optimization team had tried to streamline the user flow by rewriting the permission script with artificial intelligence prompts. I could have fixed it in 20 minutes, maybe 15 with a cup of coffee. Instead, I sat on my porch in a hoodie, sipping tea and watching a squirrel bury a piece of food in my flower bed. It was oddly therapeutic. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a text came through from Chloe Sinclair, one of the junior analysts I had mentored. She wrote that they were pretending I had retired. I stared at the screen. Apparently, in an all-hands meeting, Brody had announced that I had transitioned out gracefully after a long career, and that new leadership was taking operations in a bold new direction. There was no mention of being fired, no paperwork, and no clarification. It was just a soft erasure, as if I were a dusty trophy being moved to the attic. But they forgot the part where I built the very shelf they were standing on. That same day, I received another call, this one from Julian Porter, an investor relations manager I had worked with closely. He left a voicemail containing just 6 words, "Did you sign the verification packet?" I had not, because no one had sent one, and because no one knew they needed it except me. Every quarter, for our primary investor to release the next tranche of funding, we had to submit a milestone verification packet. It was a formal document confirming all deliverables, contracts, and compliance thresholds were met. It had to be compiled by someone with verified oversight authority whose name matched what was filed with the funding agreement. That person was me, Timothy Ward. It was written in a single line buried on page 47 of a very long document that everyone else had stopped reading years ago. Brody had no idea, but someone upstairs had finally figured it out. Then the email from legal arrived at 9:30 in the morning. The subject line was friendly documentation request, and the body was pure corporate theater. It asked if I could, at my earliest convenience, affirm procedural oversight for the prior quarter in alignment with historical protocols. It was a bloated way of asking me to sign a compliance memo they had clearly drafted 5 minutes prior. It was backdated, of course, with a signature line pre-filled with my name. I stared at it for a full minute, closed it, and dragged the thread to a folder I labeled "Nice Try." I was not going to jail because a man-child wanted to impress his father with a slide deck. By lunch, 2 more messages followed, including one from Brody's assistant, who said Brody was hoping to present on Thursday. That document represented federal-level compliance, not a grocery list. It was the last lock on a vault door, and only my name could turn the key. That afternoon, the lead investor's office placed a call directly to Grant Vance. The tone was clipped. They wanted to know when the formal milestone verification would be submitted so the $50 million disbursement could be processed. Grant deferred to his son, and Brody, in his infinite confidence, told them everything was under control. At 4:15 in the afternoon, the investor's lawyer requested a clause review. That was the moment the music stopped. Clause 7.3 of the funding agreement tied milestone verification to a designated operational oversight officers, singular. Any change required board approval and documented consent from the lead investor, filed at least 12 business days before the review. They had filed nothing. They had fired me with a phone call and tried to pretend I had evaporated. Now, the only thing standing between the company and $50 million was my signature. The irony was beautiful. A compliance clause overlooked by every ego in the room was now weaponized by their own neglect. I went for a walk, leaving my phone on the counter. When I returned, I had 6 unread messages, including one from Julian apologizing and one from the investor's assistant asking to set up an off-the-record conversation. I did not answer. The clause would do the talking for me. The emergency board meeting began at 8:30 in the morning. Everyone was pretending it was not a massive fire dressed in business casual. Grant Vance logged in from home, looking annoyed that consequences had interrupted his morning. Brody was already there, smiling and acting like he was about to pitch a new funding round. The investor's lawyer opened a black folder and began reading Section 7.3. He noted that all capital releases were contingent on active oversight by the registered officer, Timothy Ward, and that no successor had been named, nor had a formal notice of termination been submitted. Silence hit the room. Brody tried to laugh it off, saying I was no longer there and that they had streamlined operations. The investor's lawyer raised his hand and stated that it was a matter of due process, which they had broken. He explained that because I was a board-designated officer under the agreement, any attempt to terminate my employment without a formal board resolution and investor notification was void ab initio, meaning it was legally invalid from the very beginning. Furthermore, by locking me out and pretending I had retired, Brody and the chief executive officer had committed a material breach of fiduciary duty. The lawyer stated they would not authorize further disbursements until the matter was resolved. That meant the $50 million funding tranche was frozen. Brody sat there blinking, realizing his last name could not save him from a paper trail he had never read. The spreadsheet on the projector showed vendor payments and development forecasts all grayed out. Every number was suddenly vapor. By Wednesday, the first domino fell. A vendor out of Wyoming paused their shipment of precision components, citing contractual irregularities. A logistics firm in Utah stopped service support. A contractor in Maryland froze access to a testing environment. Grant Vance's inbox ballooned to over 1,000 unread messages in under 48 hours. By Thursday afternoon, Brody's name disappeared from the org chart. He was rebranded, then vanished altogether. The investor emailed me directly, offering a consulting engagement with flexible terms. The board convened a governance review to investigate how Brody had been allowed to fire an essential executive without board ratification. On Friday evening, I sat in a cafe 2 blocks from headquarters, watching them scramble inside the glass building. My phone buzzed with a message from Brenda Jenkins, the payroll lead, who sent a small payment with a note saying I was right. She had always told me they would figure out I was the spine holding the business together. I felt no anger, just stillness. They broke the system, and I had simply stopped holding it together. 3 weeks later, the final meeting was called. This second emergency gathering was not on any regular calendar. It was summoned directly by the investor group at 8 o'clock in the morning. There was no coffee service, no pleasantries, and no performative smiles. The investors' team had flown in from New York to deliver the final verdict. The room was cold, filled with tense faces and the heavy rustles of legal binders. Grant Vance sat at the head of the table, looking like he had aged 5 years in the span of 21 days. Brody sat next to him, slumped in his chair, his usual smugness replaced by a vacant stare. The lead investor, Owen, cleared his throat and did not waste time. He explained that Aegis Capital was officially halting all funding operations. The failure to maintain a designated oversight officer was a material breach of the covenant. and they would not risk their capital in a company that treated regulatory compliance as a personal playground. He looked directly at Grant and asked if he understood the gravity of his son's actions. When Brody tried to mutter an excuse about operational efficiency, Owen cut him off, saying that the company had lost all credibility. The funding was officially frozen, and without that cash injection, the company was facing liquidation within the quarter. The board members immediately turned on Grant. One by one, they demanded a complete restructuring. They forced a vote, and by the time the meeting ended at 9:30, Brody was completely stripped of his titles and walked out of the building by security. Grant was placed on administrative leave, his legacy shattered by the very son he had tried to shield. Later that afternoon, Owen came to my new office. It was a smaller, quieter space that I had rented, built with actual intention rather than corporate ego. There were no flashy whiteboards or stock photos of mountain climbers, just clean desks and functional systems. Owen did not offer a handshake, just a respectful nod. He slid a contract across the table and asked me to lead the corporate restructuring as an independent consultant. He promised there would be no family relations or unqualified executives involved. I looked at the terms, which included a significant equity stake and complete operational control. I signed it. Before we began the work, I hung one item on the wall. It was a printed transcript of the phone call where Brody had yelled that he was the chief executive officer's son and that I was fired. Underneath it, I placed a bright yellow sticky note with the words, "Not anymore." Thank you for watching. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues will not know what hit them.